I didn't really. No, I was just saying I didn't really get that because every time that Jordan and I, shout out to my cousin Jordan,
What's up?
and every time he and I would come over, or I would just come over to like just events where you were having where your family would cook.
Yeah.
I didn't get that from you. Like, I mean, the crowd you hung around, again, being Vietnamese, and really you had friends like Peter, who was Chinese, and you did have some Vietnamese family as well. But I just never knew that you didn't have that understanding with them because they were so loving and so giving and accepting of me, especially being a person, being Black,
Absolutely.
not feeling like they weren't judging me at all. It was just like, how you doing? Glad to see me every time that I came by. So I didn't even know that was something that you were dealing with. And then just to, like, when I was actually in depth in those articles and really getting an understanding from of you, and then also just watching, I forget, it was like a quick documentary type thing for you. And this was I think after or before Top Chef, but it was really in depth of you talking about your dad not really wanting you to become a chef, because again, him working as hard as he did in the food industry, and it was eye-opening to me, because you really don't know. Like you said, you have a perception of somebody, and then you get to actually look from the outside in at that person, or from their own words, and you're like, man, that is crazy. Like, I didn't even know that was the case. So I think that I'm well, definitely grateful that you were able to understand them and get more knowledge, which I do want to talk about, because I don't want to just, me talk the whole time. But I'm glad that you're able to actually understand, A, why they came over here, and B, why they didn't talk about it. And even for that cooking, like, back to that other question, because you definitely gave me in depth on yourself, but for you specifically, when was it that, instead of you just kind of like, oh, mom's cooking, okay, when did you really start to take that in? Because you did talk about that as a kid, and one of those articles, or the video, where you did she kind of taught you little things, but as you got older, to your point, your adolescence, you were just kind of just running around and just doing Tu Phu, and really just trying to find your place in the city of Oakland with the diversity that we have. Because even though we were diverse, we were still very segregated in a sense of class, which really ties into this construct that the Europeans created called race. So when did you really get a chance to stop
You
being?
brought the R word up.
I know, right?
R word.
I like to call it a construct, man, because you can't tell me we're all the same species. But when was it? When was it for you where you really were like, I'm going to look at this in more depth as far as becoming a chef, and understand, really falling in love with the cuisine and your culture?
Absolutely, man. But let me just kind of speak to this about my family, my parents. And remember Leon Poe, big ass Leon. We used to hoop with him, PE, lunchtime all the time. Like,
foul the hell out of him because I couldn't guard him. Yeah, man. Yeah, I know. It was horrible. But go ahead.
It was years later. I think you and I and Jordan talked about it. We found out he was homeless, like years later after the fact. And just to kind of attest to people with their demons, and with their pain, whether it's PTSD or homelessness, or even any sort of abuse that people are experiencing, is what I've learned years later on, is that it's easier for people to wear smiles, than to display their scars.
It's a fact.
And I think that's something that you probably experienced with my parents. So and I think just to kind of get into a discussion about what you asked me recently about where did this all start. I think for me, growing up in my adolescent years, like, I'm talking about like adolescent youth, like in grade school and all that stuff. Like, my parents had just come over, they weren't fully established. I grew up super hungry all the time. And growing up hungry, I think gave me a very specific obsession and certain relationship with food. So food meant happy thing for me. You know, and I think you knew this of me about high school as well too, is that, my family to this day very seldomly celebrates the holidays. I remember you telling me about Thanksgiving, and
That's right, man. Trying to invite you over a couple times. You know it, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was so beautiful. But every time you tell me about it, it would melt my mind because earlier in my youth, and in my comparison to other people, I don't think I've ever exchanged like full stories of you where I had a lavish feast the way your family did
Mm,
on Thanksgiving. Like we just didn't have that.
mm,
Um, and the memories that I do have with food is, um, my mom was infamous for buying chicken bones, and I
mm.
didn't know where those chicken bones were from. It was years later that she would tell me that, there were times where your dad and I were completely broke, and we would buy chicken bones because at the butcher market or at the meat counter, whatever, especially at the Asian store, they gave those bones away for free because no one would ever buy them.
Wow.
My mom would go and buy that and make soup out of it. That's not too far. And that was a common thing on my dinner table for years.
Mm.
Absolutely. And for me, it was a normalcy. And just to compare and contrast, that's like Charlie and a chocolate factory cabbage soup sort of style. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I got you, man. That didn't see. This is what I'm talking about. Like this is the in depth of you that like I didn't know, man. And I don't think because of when we sit and talk about what's normal to us. Like I have a huge family. I mean, my mom comes from she's the eighth child. So
Yeah.
like you're talking about the patriarch and the matriarch of the family, my grandparents, and rest in power with them. It didn't matter what it was, man. Like we're somebody's house and everybody's there. So if somebody got a new house, even if somebody moved to an apartment, for crying out loud, everybody showed up because
So,
yeah, somebody's gonna host those holidays. But I didn't. But to again, because your parents, whenever you had an event, your parents you had abundance of food, but you had a lot of people there. But see that now, but then I can understand that because even I could tell a lot of times, and now that because you talk about it, I can look at it now because I always got uneasiness from you at those type of events, but I
yeah,
never really understood why.
yeah,
And because your family, some cousins, some just friends that were a part of the community as a whole, like I didn't really, I was always trying to just be like, make sure that I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes because I'm here for Tu Phu. So I didn't really,
yeah,
I can put that together now, man. But that's crazy because I got that sense from you that it was always, it seemed like it was like anger, but not, it wasn't really towards anybody. But I could, now that you're saying that, it's because like your parents bought this feast and they didn't have any money. Like, and they
yeah.
couldn't, and it was like you didn't do that, wasn't something that was a normalcy for you. So I mean, and again, I don't want to speak for you because you're here, you can talk about it yourself, but it seemed like now that we're talking about it, it was like you buying all this food, but like we don't we don't do this on a daily basis. We don't have enough, or I didn't grow up to have enough, and now we're splurging on something that we really can't splurge on just to, in your mind, probably to show face to these people, but because you're hosting them, but that's not reality. So, but keep going, man, keep talking about it because this is
Absolutely.
deep.
Absolutely, bro. And I think that's a PTSD thing,
Mm,
like um you see it in foster kids, you see it in people who have war.
mm,
Because war, let's talk about war. So in war, there's always a scarcity. People are always starving in war. Like
mm,
there's never an abundance of food in war because there's rationing. People are bombing you. There's guns everywhere. So like your infrastructure for agriculture and the food system is completely shot.
mhm,
Especially during that time in Vietnam, like the infrastructure was completely shot. Like people
mm,
didn't have food to eat. People were killing each other for food. So
mm,
the way that impacts your thinking is that you know this is my stuff. It's not about celebrating and giving out.
yeah.
It's completely opposite. This is my
Mm,
stuff. Like until this day, I see my mom hide stuff. She'll buy treats for herself and
mm,
she'll hide it in weird places, and that's just like a comfort instinct. You know,
mm,
I know it's a very common thing with kids who come out of the foster youth care system is that they'll label their food because that's what happened in foster homes is that they have to label their food in the
all right,
fridge
so,
so no
damn.
one can eat it. You
Mm,
know, so I think that's the complexities of PTSD and the effects of war and and reacting to experiencing something horrific. I'm not a psychologist or even a therapist, but I think that's a huge root of what that is. And just like any other um, undiagnosed mental things that can be passed on generationally to your kids or whatnot, because how you perceive the world, you can pass that anger or that fear on fairly easily, you know. And I think I inherit that in my youth, and it translated to me to be very angry because, and I think you know this about my anger in my youth, is that um, I was angry because that was my reaction to being afraid, of being fearful of everything. You know, we might go into a party back then, and you might be like, you're like one of the happiest dudes I know. Like, hey, and for me, I could probably just click off just like a firecracker, like 16, 17 years old. This is me being honest, not trying to make a certain image of myself, but I think that's one of the things that, you know, in addition to the toxicity of the fear that I have, that I learned about the world, it was me using masculinity as an excuse to fill in those voids, you know. And I think we saw that a lot in our other friends as well, that kind of took on the life of Oakland street mentality, you know what I mean? And not that I was ever successful at any of that stuff, but I
Me either.
Yeah.
Me either.
Like Pac says, you know, Pac was like, I'll try to be a dope dealer, but I ended up giving up everything away, and I never collect payment because he had too big of a heart, you know?
Yeah.